Greetings, it is I, Cantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue where we left off. We just talked about 3 video game role-playing games that were great ones to play. I let you know about them. Now I'm going to talk about using them not only in your BESM game, but using them in your Pathfinder and 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. So let's dive into it with Final Fantasy VI. So for your BESM game, I'm going to say 200 points. That's what your starting point is. Your characters are going to gain a lot of points. So this is a more campaign-based game. You're going to play, they're going to get points, they're going to get stronger. It's going to be the same similar progression that a lot of video games get. So for your characters, try to get a cast of characters is what you want. Once you've placed them in this world, have them be at a point in time where they've perhaps all meet up, at least the characters that are the main PCs. If you want to round out their cast with some NPCs, that's perfectly fine to make a larger sort of group of team. Maybe you want 5 characters at a time going into things, so you have 2 or 3 NPCs to represent the entire group, that they can be like, oh, come and help us out on a mission. You could, of course, have any number if you really wanted to. I would not go beyond what they had in the original game, which I believe you could get up to 14 characters with the special characters. So 2 extras that you really didn't need to get, but again, you could have 14 characters, you could have 7, you could have anywhere in between there. I would recommend a couple of NPCs just to sort of fill out the team. And I would recommend sort of getting into the point in time with the storyline when at least these 4 have gotten together. Now for the adventure they're going to go on, have them deal with the Empire similar to what they did in the game. You can have it change as much as you want. You can have them attack different cities, do different things with different cities, have different sort of plot lines revolving around these various nations. You could have the NPC characters come in when things are going on in these different places. It's given you a world setting. You've got a map, you've got a couple of locations in there you can throw people into. You can add locations in very easily. You can even expand on some of the locations that exist already. Deal with the fact that they will lose at some point in time to come back. Kefka should win at some point in time regardless. You can make it even more dramatic than what happened with them. That's perfectly fine. How it ends up that he wins is completely up to you, but he should win at some point in time. Drive your characters away, that they have to reunite their team of people, perhaps recruit more people, and lead a final assault on Kefka. It should have that similar storyline. You could also replace Kefka with another person too. You could say that he didn't get the final power, that someone else did, and then maybe the results would be different for the ruined world. If the Emperor got the power, it would have been like the Imperial world at that point in time. So you skip ahead in time, and it's a world that's being industrialized, and it, rather than just destroyed everything, it's being a world that's, you know, nature is dying off and things are being torn down. It's becoming a barren landscape. It would be a different kind of world, just as bad, and you'll have to stop it. You could go either of those routes, or choose another character that sort of would fill the place from the cast, or make up someone else that you want to have that could add to this cast of NPCs. Perfectly your choice. Now I have to say for this one, Pathfinder is actually not a difficult one to adapt. I would have, at most, 1 or 2 spellcasters on your team, because you can see how rare magic is. Other folks could perhaps learn magic later on if they get Esper Shards, and what they would do then is they could take, similar to what a rogue gets for rogue talents, they could take a series of feats gaining magical spells. It effectively would be the same. You're going to have to make a few things up for this, that when they have hold of an Esper, they can learn it from it or Esperite, they can learn it from there. Now granted, they're probably not going to have as much variety, and there is some other options too. You could use the Gestalt rules. Gestalt rules say that you have 2 classes at the same time. It's an optional sort of rule that you take the best of both classes when you're using it. So effectively, whatever 2 classes I am, I take the best of the 2 of them, add that together, that's my class. You could say that maybe when people unlock magic, they get to be Gestalt. That you can start learning spells from Esperite, rather than learning it from spell books and stuff like that. Then maybe you can have everybody take wizard levels or something like that if you want to do that. Now for special abilities, some of those are easy to do. For a character sort of like Terra, you can have it that their race gives something, that you don't give, that you make up a race based around that ability, the sort of morphing ability. For other ones, mixed bag, like Edgar and his tools. You give special equipment that a person can build and make, or could find, things like that. They all can be developed very well, and you may have to come up with own feats or feat chains in order to really come up with these. Or you could give people, if someone comes up with an idea for something similar to one of these, that would be really cool. Encourage them and come up with something that you would represent that it would progress down the line as they would level up. These are fine. So it does take a little work still, but the basic classes are in place. And some of the other options, as I said, are more optional. The Esprit, the Gestalt, the unique special skills, they really are things you want, but you don't need. Now for 5th edition, it is, again, this is going to be a little more difficult. This is not necessarily more difficult. It can be pretty much the same. You're going to keep it the same, similar with the number of spellcasters, keeping the numbers down. Classes you can choose very easily. What you can do is you could use online information or some of your own information and come up with different paths for characters if you want to come up with special abilities. Some of those fit very well. Some abilities actually seem to fit pretty well. Like, you can mimic some of these things very well. Like, you can be Gao, learning his abilities. You could be a druid. He'd be using wild shape, except you could say, like, rather than taking the physical form, he gains the abilities of something, like the natural attacks and things like that. Like, he doesn't take the full form of it. You don't necessarily have to change the balance within the game, but you can add some of these things in. Again, you're going to have to do custom things to really fit with some of these things, but you could also just keep it simple classes as usual, that certain things are allowed and certain things are not in order to give these abilities. You could also use feats, of course. They are an optional rule in 5th edition, and it is a great way of adding extra abilities. Coming up with your own feats or using online materials might be suggestible that you can find things to expand it. Online materials, people come up with things all the time. You can look some of these up. The homebrewed things, they're usually pretty well balanced. Most people do them pretty well. You can approve them or disapprove them as much as you want. Let's move on. Let's talk about the next one. Let's talk about Chrono Trigger. So for Chrono Trigger, I would say 200, 250 points. I'm saying I'm going to make a note here for the skills because I didn't want to write this all out. For the skill genre, for each character, you're going to have to look at them individually, which ones they would know. Meaning, if you're from the future, you'd know skills appropriate to the future. If you're from the Stone Age, check the Stone Age chart. Compare it to what you wouldn't be able to take, and then go back to the multi-genre chart here, and choose accordingly. You have options, because I gave this one here, because that's what the points should be. But characters, depending on their time period, should choose things appropriately. That's for you as the game master to make sure happens. Now your characters should be assembled from across time. You'd have a couple of people from the same times. Make them a cast of characters. You can change sort of races around, change things like that. You could have a robot, you could have a monster, you could have, like, there was a frog person, you could have a frog person. You could just have them all humans. You can have them have their magical abilities, their special techniques. Those sort of things are very easy to develop. BESM's a great system for this because of that nature. Of course, you're going to have them deal with time traveling, and you could have maybe the time travel device by now, or you could just have them using gates to begin with. It's up to you. The main team will be assembled when you start the game, and of course, there's always opportunities for more people to join in, or NPCs to join in. They'll be traveling at different times. You can take them to these different places, and of course, you can use the dungeons that exist in these different areas, or make up your own. They give a lot of time suggestions. You come up with your own times for them to travel to. Other areas in between these different times that probably existed, that might have different aesthetics, enough that these people going into them, it would make sense. And of course, you can deal with the aspects of traveling these different times and changing the timeline. It will make it a little complex, but it's fun. Now let's talk about adapting Pathfinder. This is actually not too difficult. I would recommend doing things like using race and class combinations. For example, Chrono, he pretty much starts out as a fighter. When he gains magical abilities, have him take levels in Magus. You could start out more than first level because they have an established team, and you could say, oh, if you want to have magical abilities, they're unlocked. So you could have then Chrono just be like a couple levels of fighter and some levels of Magus, or you could have him all Magus maybe, or something like that. That maybe he just didn't have his magical powers to begin with. For races, that's a little more difficult. The Pathfinder gives a lot of options. You could make Robo into something like an android race and just make him look more like a robot. Monster ones, of course, you know, you could have like little goblins. Play goblin. They have rules for other various types of creatures you could play that are a little more interesting. Like for Frog, they have animal people rules that you could just be one of those, a manimal. Granted, that's a little more difficult to adapt the exact level and things like that, but they do talk about that in the materials. And for people from the future, they have the technology guide. Everything else, you can just use whatever technology would be appropriate to it. For example, Luca would probably be a gunslinger of some type, but might have some kind of gun that runs on special kinds of energy and doesn't use bullets, because she just seems to have sort of an energy shots or something, like a laser pistol. You could go simply for that. That's what she would have, and you can just make it have the same damage as a normal pistol. She just doesn't have to worry about the reloading part. The exact nature of them, you could easily mimic any of the characters in Pathfinder, and so that's why it makes it very easy to adapt. 5th edition, on the other hand, for that, you can focus on classes that eventually gain spellcasting or have spellcasting. For example, Meryl, probably you just take a class that could, like, take Cleric. On the other hand, Chrono, you might want to have him Eldritch Knight. That might make sense, that he gets some spells to go with his sword fighting. For races, it's a little more difficult. You can most likely use the base races. They don't have a huge amount of extra races optional in 5th edition yet, which will probably come out with more as time goes on. But you could also use online things. There's probably, you can find races online which might fit appropriately into this adaptation. Same goes for technology. There is materials online that might help you with various types of technology like firearms or anything that might be from the future, which there probably will be little bits of, not a huge amount. And of course you can look online for those materials or come up with something on your own. So let's finish talking about adapting Breath of Fire 3. Now for that one, you can keep it pretty simple. You should probably have someone that's a dragon race, that they have to gain their ability to transform into a dragon, use abilities like that. Have different people specialize in different sort of abilities, like elements, or it's different types of spell casting, different abilities that they may or may not have. You've got there's a werecat, there's a plant monster, there's Momo who has a sniper rifle. The options are very easy to adapt in BESM, and you are most likely going to then go against the goddess Myria. The entire storyline, you can mimic the exact Breath of Fire 3 as much as you want. Of course, you can also do things like have them go against Myria, but take an entirely different path, adding new places to visit. You could revisit these old places, you can do any of these sort of things. You could come up with new places to add into the world as long as they seem to fit. The sky's the limit as dependent on how much work you want to do in adapting the world, of course. Now, let's bring in Pathfinder. So most of this is pretty simple. You keep 2 classes which are appropriate. Most of the ones that get some kind of spellcasting be great, because most of the characters get some kind of spellcasting. Things like being a magus or an inquisitor would function very well because they get very good fighting. One of the hybrid classes might work too, something like a Skald. Anything like that would work very well in the system. Even something like a paladin might work, or a ranger, because they get some limited amounts of spells. You could also expand some of their spell lists if you think it would be appropriate to them. Races are also fairly easy to do. For example, you can have a werecat, you can have a sort of like a half-dragon in there. For the plant person, there's probably a plant race you could have them be for Pico. These sort of things are very easy. On the other hand, the dragon part is probably going to be the most difficult part, giving someone the ability to change into a dragon. My recommendation is to keep it a chain of feats, or the person would get a progression of things, like with feats and stuff, that maybe they're drawn to using. Now granted, that does leave people open, that they can't take other feats. You can easily fix this, that most people are going to find magic items and things like that, which probably not going to have a huge amount of magic items, that you can equate about 10,000 worth of equipment to effectively 1 feat. There you go. That is actually the effective amount of money it costs to buy a magic item with a feat in it. So if you're considering that most people are going to get their own sort of equipment and stuff like that based upon their progression, you know, armor and special items they're probably going to get and progress around, you could leave a section of that to your dragon character that they're not going to get, and in turn give them some more feats. Again, they could also be a class that gets bonus feats. That would be helpful too. But you give them progression that they may have only the base form that they can transform into without getting any kind of feats. the whelp form, and that they would need to get different, like, genes, effectively, would there be the feats, similar to the genes. That you'd have ones that would give elements, other ones that would give certain forms, and they have requirements to make it a feat tree of your own, and you can sort of figure it out that way. I think it would be very interesting to do that, and give them the option that if they ever get a bonus feat, regardless from the source, they could take more of it. Now, adapting it for 5th edition is a little different. Now, for this one, the races are usually pretty straightforward. Some of them are a little more difficult. Like, Gar makes a great Dragonborn. But Ryu and Peko, they're a little more difficult. Like, some of them you can probably look online to find things, like for your cat friend, for your plant friend, Pico, that's a little more difficult. Again, online might have something, but you could also come up with using just the stats of another base race and calling it that very easily. Ryu is probably a more difficult one to make in general. Most of the other ones you can mimic characters very similar, giving them, magical abilities. You could be something like an Eldritch Knight, Arcane Trickster. You could definitely be just a spellcasting class in general. You could be something like a Paladin, something like a Ranger, where you get some spells. Those are easy to do with that. Maybe make it that Ryu gets some of the abilities from another class or something like that. Design his own sort of path along that class. There's a lot of options for trying to figure out how to make it. For his base form, you could almost give it that he has a combination of being both a human and a Dragonborn, and he can transform between them, but you'd have to sort of pair off them so they would fit together, which would not necessarily be easy. Effectively, you would have to change the ability scores that you'd be gaining for a human, almost take the optional one where you get a feat, and instead of getting a feat, gain the effective ability to change into a dragon form. You could also have access to feats which gain dragon form abilities. That might be something to do, that then that player is more drawn, rather than getting ability scores up, to take feats in order to adapt their dragon form better. Again, these are both two ways you can try to adapt his ability to a character and balance it out. Unfortunately, things like this where you're adding in stuff and trying to mimic stuff, you need to adapt it on your own. So that's it for today. I went over these 3 video games. I told you how to use them in your BESM games and gave you suggestions of using them in both Pathfinder and 5th edition games. All of these will need work. Probably the Pathfinder and the 5th edition will need a little bit of work adapting systems to them, but not impossible, as I've shown you. So, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like this video. It shows you support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. Please subscribe if you already have it. We're always looking for more members, more citizens, and please share this video. If you know anybody that would learn from it, or would just enjoy it, please share it with them. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.